ConocoPhillips strives to set a new standard of excellence in everything we do. Guided by the company's spirit values, our standard always starts with safety. Safety is more than ensuring we finish each day incident and injury-free. It's the way we work around the world. To advance our commitment to safety even further, we've established life-saving rules. Designed to address high-risk activities and based on industry best practices and lessons learned, our rules provide clear, simple actions that will help prevent serious or fatal injuries. They are part of our safe work cycle that includes planning, execution, verification, and correction. It's important to remember that the life-saving rules do not replace our existing safety rules. They reinforce them by providing an extra check to ensure that people are working safely and consistently in all our operations around the world. The rules also support the Health, Safety, and Environment Management System and support other management system safeguards against injuries and incidents already in place. And while all the rules address personal safety, some of the rules specifically support ConocoPhillips' intense focus on process safety. These rules are to be followed every workday and in every work setting. The lives of our colleagues and contract workers depend on it. By following the life-saving rules, we will prevent incidents and injuries and finish every workday the same way we started it. Remember, setting a new standard of excellence starts with safety and with you. Share your story and tell us how our life-saving rules are helping ConocoPhillips set a new standard in safety excellence.
Emergency procedures and training. Training is required on all company locations and is based on the scope of the job. Mandatory trainings include Lower 48 Safety Orientation Video, Asset-Specific Orientation. When you arrive on location, be sure to sign in and check with the ConocoPhillips site supervisor or person in charge. All ConocoPhillips process safety management facilities have emergency response plans. Office buildings have the emergency response plan posted at each entrance, detailing the actions to be taken in the event of an emergency. While in a facility building or at a field location, emergency procedures must be discussed during the job safety analysis conversation. If you're working in a plant or stabilizer, the emergency response plan will be reviewed with you by an on-site employee before entering the facility. Job safety analysis. A job safety analysis is required prior to beginning any work activities. The JSA meeting includes discussing the scope of work in detail, ensuring you have the right tools and equipment to do the job, and identifying all known hazards to eliminate or mitigate risk before work is started. The job safety analysis will be led by your supervisor or a trained facilitator and should include all impacted employees and guests. The Go card is used to facilitate this discussion. In collaboration with the team, you'll discuss known potential hazards. If something is not addressed during this conversation, mention it to the group during the JSA for a new point of discussion. This could be an opportunity for learning or to share your knowledge with others on the job. The job safety analysis must be updated and Go card must be reviewed if there are any changes to the initial work plan or if additional hazards are identified during the job. Work crews must also discuss the job safety analysis and upcoming work after any plan breaks. The most important part of the job safety analysis and Go card process is the discussion. Life-saving rule cards are incorporated into the JSA discussion when applicable. Other resources that may be utilized as part of the JSA include ConocoPhillips Lower 48 Health, Safety, and Environment Handbook, Standard Operating Procedures and Guidelines, HSE manuals, and any other resource that facilitates open discussion such as the Process Safety Fundamentals. Minimum requirements for critical activities are addressed as part of pre-job planning through permits and risk assessments. Once the activity has commenced, field verification minimum requirements are effectively implemented through two-way learning conversations during these critical tasks. Stop work authority. Stop work authority permits any individual at any level to halt the job or task when a hazardous situation or act appears imminent. You may stop work without fear of repercussions. Some examples of situations where stop work authority should be applied are work not going as planned, a pause in the work to ensure workers understand the job tasks, a pause in work until driving and working conditions are safe due to heavy rain, fog, snow, or ice, changes in job conditions that require a new plan, not utilizing proper personal protective equipment. Driving safety. Driving motor vehicles is one of the highest risk activities you'll do each day. When driving on ConocoPhillips business or property, the following driving rules must be followed. Seatbelts must be worn by all passengers while the vehicle is in motion. Riding in the back of a pickup is prohibited. Mobile phone use of any kind while driving is strictly prohibited. Obey posted speed limits at all times. Drivers must adjust their driving to accommodate weather, terrain, and environmental conditions. Personnel are not to drive when fatigued. Vehicle occupant has the right and duty to intervene when driving safety rules are not being followed. Ensure all cargo is secured so it does not affect vehicle stability or pose a hazard to other drivers. Where possible, vehicles should be parked in a manner to avoid backing up. When reversing is necessary, vehicles larger than a standard pickup shall have a spotter. Or if working alone, use a pre-approved method for backing. All vehicles and equipment in transit must maintain 4 feet minimum clearance distance from power lines. All equipment that can be elevated must maintain a minimum of 10 feet from a power line during work activity. Refer to the HSE Handbook for more details related to working around overhead power lines. According to our Lower 48 driving policy, before driving a company vehicle, individuals are to have a proper driver's license for the motor vehicle and cargo being transported and have completed defensive driver training. Only initial defensive driver training is required. If you are not automatically assigned online defensive driving, it is your responsibility to sign up for and complete this training in My Learning. You can locate the training by searching for Defensive Driving National Safety Council in My Learning. Contractors should follow their respective companies' driving policies and training. Incident reporting. Regardless of severity, you must report all incidents or unplanned events to the ConocoPhillips supervisor or person in charge as soon as possible. Incidents can include any unsafe acts, near misses, vehicle incidents, injuries, spills, releases, flaring, fires, and property damage. If you're uncertain whether an event should be reported, always report it. ConocoPhillips subscribes to a service called Axiom. If medical treatment is needed, contact Axiom or your company's dedicated case management provider. Case managers consult on work-related injuries, including consultation and follow-up with the injured party, medical facilities, and physicians to help facilitate the proper medical care when needed. If emergency medical treatment is needed, make contact right away. A case management provider, such as Axiom, should additionally be contacted for any injury. The case management company will ensure any injured party receives consultation and follow-up with a medical provider for appropriate care. The Health, Safety, and Environment Handbook should be utilized as a field guide to help answer questions relating to the use of policies, procedures, and regulations. Handbooks are available to all individuals, company, or contractor. Local health, safety, and environment personnel will provide health, safety, and environment handbooks as needed. Permit to work. In addition to the job safety analysis conversation, some activities require a permit before work can be conducted. All employees and contractors are expected to work under a valid permit when required. Some activities that require a permit include lockout, tagout, and try, when the work depends on isolations from hazards such as electrical, mechanical, chemical, and other hazards. Be sure to verify isolation before work begins. Do not work on any electric system unless you've received specialized training and authorization to do so. Refer to HSE Handbook or HSE Manual for further guidance. Confined space entry. Obtain authorization before entering a confined space. Confined spaces may include mud and reserve pits, cellars, frac tanks, flow pits, vessels, tanks, trenches, and excavations deeper than 4 feet. Passive monitors are not allowed for atmospheric testing of confined spaces. Hot work. All hot work such as cutting, grinding, or welding within 75 feet of hydrocarbon sources or 35 feet of combustibles must be completed under a hot work permit. Use of spark-generating tools or equipment such as drills, portable generators, or laptops within a classified area or within 10 feet of a wellhead also requires a hot work permit. A hot work permit is not required inside a classified area, but does require continuous atmospheric monitoring to be performed while using the following non-intrinsically safe tools: cameras, radios, calibration, and testing equipment. Phones and tablets are permitted to be used without a hot work permit or continuous atmospheric monitoring, provided this equipment is in good working order, does not have a removable battery or internal fan mechanism, and in a fully protective case. External ports cannot be utilized on these devices in classified areas. Excavation, trenching, and ground disturbance. Obtain authorization before starting ground disturbance or excavation activities. One-call clearance and applicable line-finding procedures are required prior to any ground disturbance. All underground services must be identified and maintained throughout the job. An excavation competent person is required on site to oversee all excavations. Bypassing safety devices. Bypassing safety devices is the process of removing part of a safety system or safety protection device from service. Bypassing, disabling, or inhibiting a safety device compromises the effectiveness of the protection design and should only be performed when absolutely necessary. It is important to understand the protections provided by the device and to mitigate risk associated with removing it from service. A written bypass safety device permit must be used anytime safety devices are bypassed for inspection, testing, repair, or replacement. Only authorized permit writers may issue and complete work permits. Training. If you're an employee or a contingent worker, your required HSE training will be assigned via MyLearning based on your job role. For some roles, this assignment may include training and field verifications that must be completed prior to performing or overseeing certain field activities such as lockout-tagout, hot work, or confined space entry. Operating equipment such as man lifts, forklifts, or cranes require an OSHA-compliant training certificate. Proof of training is required to be presented upon request before work can be started. Safety. If working alone, follow your company's lone worker program and inform your supervisor. All crews must have at least one person present on location that can speak and read English and be responsible for translating work information, including the JSA, for any non-English speaking workers. Follow safe lifting operations and never walk under a suspended load. If performing mechanical lifting and rigging, taglines or a hands-free tool shall always be used to guide and position suspended loads. Taglines should be of sufficient length to protect workers from the fall path of the load. Rigging shall always be inspected before use and be properly rated. Protect yourself against a fall when working at heights. The hierarchy of fall protection should always be considered prior to working at heights, including options to eliminate the need to work at heights. All persons walking or working on a platform with an unprotected side or edge that's 4 feet or more above a lower level, including man lifts, must be protected. Use fall protection when working outside a protective work environment, including man lifts. See local rules and regulations for specific height requirements. Portable ladders must be approved, inspected, and securely tied off prior to use. Scaffolding must be designed, erected, and inspected by trained and certified personnel. Maintain 3 points of contact when ascending or descending stairs. Use a tool belt, shoulder sling, backpack, or hoist to carry and move objects. At no point should an employee or contractor run on location. All workers should be mindful of any and all warning signs and comply with any requirements such as hearing protection required, restricted area, etc. Employees should acknowledge and respond accordingly to any and all alarms, sirens, and beacons. Heat stress should be considered when working in high heat areas. Proper hydration before work begins and through the workday is essential to mitigating potentially serious heat-related issues. If a worker shows signs of a heat-related stress, immediately move him or her to a cool area, begin hydration, and monitor closely. Your supervisor and Axiom or the contractor-approved case management service should be contacted in the event of a heat-related illness. Workers in cold areas should be familiar with common cold-related injuries, such as frostbite and hypothermia, and understand common signs and symptoms associated with overexposure. Be aware that 3 factors generally affect cold-related illness and injury: low temperatures, wind speed, and wetness. Every effort should be made to reduce these factors. Practice the following in low-temperature areas. Always cover head and neck. Maintain adequate hydration, nutrition, and rest. Use proper clothing, loose, layered, and windproof. Carry additional clothing as needed. Equip vehicles with a cold weather survival kit. Take frequent breaks. Plan outside duties for warmer parts of the day. Personal protective equipment must be worn at all times while on ConocoPhillips work locations. Minimum required PPE includes flame retardant clothing, known as FRC. The proper way to wear FRC is sleeves pulled down and buttoned at the cuff, shirts tucked in at the waist and buttoned to the top. Coveralls should be zipped or buttoned to the top. No baggy, loose, or torn clothing should be worn that could become entangled in rotating equipment. Safety glasses with side shields, safety-toed footwear, hard hat. All required PPE must meet its respective standards. Additional PPE, such as gloves, hearing protection, and respiratory protection, may be required based on the job task and environment in which the work is being performed. Refer to the Personal Protective Equipment Matrix or consult with your ConocoPhillips representative to determine required PPE for the job. Hair longer than shoulder length must be secured and tucked under the hard hat or into FRCs. Remove all jewelry, including watches, bracelets, rings, necklaces, and piercings while performing work. Medical ID bracelets can be worn if they're covered to avoid any entanglement in tools or equipment. At some locations, a personal H2S monitor or 4-gas monitor must be worn 6 to 9 inches from the breathing zone on the front side of the user's body. Monitors are required in areas where no fixed detection is provided, and H2S is reasonably expected to be present in airborne concentrations greater than 10 parts per million. All monitors shall be calibrated and bump tested according to manufacturer recommendations. In the event of an alarm, all employees and contractors should evacuate in an upwind and crosswind fashion. Individuals required to wear respiratory protection must be clean-shaven, medically cleared, enrolled in the medical surveillance program, and be fit tested for the appropriate required respirator. The only exception is a small mustache not extending past the lower lip. Additional information can be found in the Respiratory Protection Manual. Respiratory protective equipment will be worn when it's required to work in an atmosphere that exceeds occupational exposure limits or has an oxygen-deficient atmosphere. If an employee's or contractor's job requires them to wear a respirator, they must provide proof of training before using the respirator. All tools and equipment should be inspected prior to use and should meet manufacturer's recommendations. Damaged or worn tools should be discarded. Prohibited items. Before arriving on location, be sure the following prohibited items and equipment are not brought on location: unauthorized explosives, ammunition, firearms, or any other weapons, including toy guns, slingshots, etc. Illegal drugs, drug paraphernalia, alcoholic beverages, disposable butane lighters, pornography, or inappropriate material. No unauthorized people or pets are allowed on site without prior permission. Horseplay and running is strictly prohibited on ConocoPhillips locations. Any prescription drug use should be communicated with your immediate supervisor. Prescription drugs must be in the original container, identifying the type of drug and the person prescribed. All persons and vehicles on ConocoPhillips property are subject to search at any time. Snap, lever, and walking boomers including the non-ratcheting type, are not allowed. Handle extensions and cheater bars are restricted to limited applications and require ConocoPhillips supervisor or person in charge approval prior to use. Before a knife or razor is used, a JSA must be performed to discuss the selected tools and their condition to determine if a safer alternative can be used. Tools and equipment are not to be altered or used in a manner beyond their original intent, and homemade or non-engineered tools and/or lifting devices are prohibited. Metal buckets must be used when handling flammable liquids and must be properly grounded and bonded. Plastic buckets are not allowed beyond their original use. Smoking, including e-cigarettes, are allowed only in designated areas. Designated smoking areas should be identified prior to beginning work during the JSA discussion. Visitors. Visitors, with the approval of local supervision, are not required to comply with all the general requirements. However, visitors will need to be escorted by a company representative at all times and will be restricted to advisory, consulting, and inspection-type tasks. Visitors will need to wear appropriate clothing and personal protective equipment and go through an orientation. If you're an office-based employee visiting the field, contact the local HSE representative to inquire about required personal protective equipment. Hazardous materials. You have a right to know about any hazardous materials you may encounter while working on a ConocoPhillips location. If a chemical is required for a task, ensure the safety data sheet is readily available. ConocoPhillips utilizes software called SiteHawk to review and store all safety data sheets. Contact HSE personnel for access to existing safety data sheets. The safety data sheet should be consulted prior to beginning work to ensure affected employees understand basic safeguards to take with the chemical. This could include required personal protective equipment, signs and symptoms of overexposure, firefighting requirements, first aid treatment, disposal requirements. All new chemicals must be approved by a company representative prior to use, including a formal chemical approval. To request approval for a new chemical, contact your local ConocoPhillips HSE representative prior to work execution. Observations and audits. As part of your commitment to ConocoPhillips safety culture, you are expected to participate in safety observation and life-saving rule verification programs. Safety observations are used to help identify safe and unsafe acts. The observation is important, but the most important part is the discussion. Life-saving rules verifications are used to ensure compliance during critical activities associated with the life-saving rules and are used to protect workers by helping identify conditions that could lead to a serious incident. Relationships matter. At ConocoPhillips, we take pride in being a great neighbor and a responsible corporate citizen, and we strive to make a positive difference in the communities where we live and operate. At ConocoPhillips, we recognize the rights and respect the traditional values, heritage, and culture of our local communities and the areas where we operate. We ask that you help us in building and maintaining relationships with those who have called this area home for generations. Please respect property rights by leaving gates the way they're found, staying on lease roads, not collecting wood, vegetation, or artifacts, and always minimizing surface disturbances. When interacting with landowners, members of the media, or the general public, please be respectful and inform them that they are not allowed on location unless they're part of a guided tour, and immediately notify your site lead or supervisor of the interaction. While working on ConocoPhillips locations, everyone should be treated ethically. Harassment, intimidation, or abuse of any kind is strictly prohibited and should be reported to the ConocoPhillips supervisor or person in charge immediately. Environment. ConocoPhillips recognizes how important it is to deliver reliable and affordable energy to the world, and that we must achieve this in a sustainable way. We care deeply about the environment, so we're working hard to shrink our footprint and lessen our impact on the communities around us. We know we can't do business any other way. We continuously look for ways to operate more safely, efficiently, and responsibly. Managing emissions is one of our key priorities. we've taken active steps to reduce our emissions company-wide. Reducing emissions, even the small equipment leaks known as fugitive emissions, is a key aspect of how we operate. We have standard operating procedures to detect and repair leaks. Any impacts to air quality should be reported immediately to your on-site ConocoPhillips supervisor or person in charge. Protection of groundwater and surface water is essential to ConocoPhillips' operation. We manage water-related risks and mitigate potential impacts to water resources. All incidents, including unplanned releases, should be reported to your ConocoPhillips supervisor or person in charge immediately. In the event of a spill, appropriate cleanup and remediation must be completed in a timely manner. Stormwater, including snow melt contained on well pads, must be free of contamination prior to draining. Detailed records of such activity is required. All operations waste must be classified, stored, labeled, and disposed per company guidelines and government regulations. Consult with your local environmental staff for approved waste management practices. Waste must be disposed of at approved disposal sites. Minimize waste generation by managing activities, recycling, and using non-hazardous alternatives where possible. We work to understand and mitigate our potential impact on biodiversity. Daily operations require compliance with many federal and state requirements enforced by various regulatory agencies related to species. You must avoid interaction and interference with wildlife. Immediately notify the site supervisor if wildlife is impacted. For more information on air, water, waste disposal, or impact to species, reach out to your local environmental staff.